All right, welcome back. So where we left off is we were using Aura to get a root cause on an issue with some of my Govee lights that are no longer working through Home Assistant. And because Aura could only look at logs, it asked us to do a lot of manual investigation steps on the server. And in the end, with a little bit of back and forth, we confirmed the issue. And I had a few options to resolve it, but I elected not to do anything so we can improve our Aura configuration and work through solving this with a little bit better automation. So today, we're going to give Aura read access to the repo and see how much better the investigation goes. I made some modifications to the config file that we saw in the previous videos, and what I'm really trying to demonstrate here is the iterative journey that you would expect to have as you start to get more use of these tools within your environment. In my sort of personal opinion, you should be able to get incremental improvements in a matter of, minutes versus, days, weeks, and months. And so my initial goal was to add GitHub MCP to this configuration file, but at the same time, I said, there's probably ways to optimize, the token usage as Aura goes and does its investigations. So something I've added here is a section about my environment, and this just sort of sets the stage when Aura starts up to understand, hey, this is a Homelab environment, everything's Docker Compose, and then because I added the GitHub MCP, I've given it information about the organization, and then a little bit more information about how we get, observability data into the different, tools that I have. So that was a big section that I added. And then basically everything else is pretty much the same. I'll post this along with the video and kind of note, any other differences. But you can see here, I've added my GitHub MCP server, and it's hosted by GitHub, so it's super easy to add. All you need is a personal access token, and in my case, I just gave it, read access to all repos in my org, and then you need administration read as well on GitHub on the org itself. So the MCP tools can actually go and discover the repos in the org. And then the last thing I added here is a GitHub analyst worker. And basically I gave it some instructions. And then this is actually really important as well. I've reduced the list of MCP tools that are available to each worker. And I've also assigned tools to each worker. And that really does a lot to reduce some of the overhead as Aura kind of figures out what it can and can't do. So we're just being more explicit. Here's all the read-only tools except for issues write. And then down here, because I'll be creating a issue at the end of this, I've added a human in the loop gate, and we can come back and look at this kind of at the end. And you can see here on the other orchestration workers, I've assigned the relevant Grafana tools to each worker. So anything involving logs, that's going to be in here under MCP filter, and then anything involving the metrics is going to be here. And there's a lot of common tools that are kind of across both. So let's look at how that improved the investigations. Okay, so I'm going to give it the same prompt that we've been using. Basically, give me a root cause on why these lights no longer work with Home Assistant. Now, I could have taken the information that we already knew from the previous investigations and kind of like short-circuited this whole process and, gone right to generate an issue or a pull request to, correct this issue. But I wanted to, show what the difference is in having more context about the environment, as well as having access to GitHub to, do additional, queries into the sort of environment around this issue. Cool. So we got the same root cause as we had before. It's that same, crash loop because of a read-only file system. So now I'm just going to ask it to do a deeper dive now that it has access to the repositories that control these services and recommend a fix. And what we'll hope to see here is that not only will it look at the repositories that are private that are responsible for these services, but it should identify the Docker Compose file that not only runs, Home Assistant, but the, Govee MQTT service. And within that compose file, it should go and look at that public facing repository. And hopefully what we'll see is it identifies that there's a specific user called out that the container is supposed to run as. Because if you remember from the previous video, that was the issue we had was um, the volume mount on the host file system uh, is has a different user and group than the containers running as. So in this case, it didn't actually go and look at the public repo that runs this service, and we could correct that by modifying our configuration to, give it more sort of agency to, go and do deeper inspection at these other services. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, so I'm kind of cheating a little bit, but, this is something you'd eventually get to. Um, Like, I know it's in the Docker file. I could have actually just said, like, "Can you go look at that repo and, see if there's anything that, stands out that would be incompatible with what we're doing here?" But, it did this really quick. It did identify, this user, and it knows that it's gonna run as, a UID because we don't have this user on our system. And so it gives me a few different options here. And, I prefer to do everything, in code and not modify my host. So we're going to look at the directions here. And it's got, some specific recommendations on how to fix Docker Compose. And then we have that final state here of, completely decoupling from host file system and convert the bind mount to a Docker name volume, which is what I think is the right approach. Now, if you wanted to, you could actually just ask Aura to open a PR directly if you gave it the permissions to do so. But, Aura's not a coding agent. Claude's really good at that. So we're just going to write up the issue and then ask Claude to fix it. And this is now you can finally see, what human in the loop is. In this case, because we're just using Aura in sort of a copilot mode, human in the loop is just doing a prompt or giving us an approval gate. And we basically, if we look at the code here, we basically said any tool, with these prefixes or, suffixes requires approval. And then we're just saying, conversational. But, you could connect this to a webhook if you had some more of like, long-lived Aura running, uh, and you wanted to like, create a Slack message or something like that. That's kind of the direction we're trying to go with this. I'm going to say yes. And we can see that issue's here. And it's documented with the problem, with the root cause, and then what the proposed fix is. We'll see how Claude handles this because that's actually not important. This is just a cache. And so now you can see Claude. was asked to open a PR, and Claude is doing its thing here. Okay, so it looks like that finished, and you can see, summary. This is all just Claude doing its thing. Here's that data migration that I don't need to run, and we'll create a PR, and we can look at the diff. Yep, pretty much what we were encouraged to do. And I'm going to go ahead and merge this. So let's see if these changes made it to the Homelab, and let's check on the status of the container, see if it's running. Cool. So yeah, there's our new name volume there. And then you can see the volume mount change to reference the name volume instead of the host volume. And we can see, yeah, we're up 2 minutes on this service. So that's looking good. And we can go back to Aura now and say, so I'm basically asking it to kind of repeat the check from the beginning. And this is just doing what I just did manually. But it's just kind of showing you that like you can do all of this without ever having to log into your host with the right automations. Perfect. So it went and confirmed that the fix got merged, and it also confirmed that the service is healthy. So that's it. That's basically a end to end of using Aura to investigate an issue and then interact with our repositories to actually get something remediated. Thanks for watching.